Hey, good late afternoon, folks. I'm Brian Bledsoe. I'm a meteorologist, climatologist from Colorado Springs, Colorado, and a lot of you have seen me speak before down here at the Texas A&M Beef Cattle Short Course. Sorry I couldn't be with you this year personally. I'm going to do my best to make sure that happens next year, but it's one of my favorite events that I get to come speak at and also get to interact with a lot of you folks with the Southern Livestock Standard and the article that I write in there every single month. So I still wanted to get you some forecast information this year, and a big thanks to A&M for having me down once again, even if it's just simply in a video capacity. I hope a lot of you can glean some of the information that I'm taking or going to be giving you today, and you can apply that to your business to simply help make the weather work for you, especially in a long-range capacity. This down here at the bottom that you'll see, the Weather 5280, that's also part of our company that we work with in Colorado for long-range forecasting. Check out that website, weather5280.com, and you'll have some good information there that you can frequent and see some updated long-range forecasts that are also included with a specific charge, or you can go in there and not be charged. Anyway, it will include forecasts for the state of Texas. So that's something a lot of you are obviously interested in. So let's check out the current status here and look at the total precipitation across the state of Texas and the region for the past 60 days. And the east part of Texas over here been very beneficial moisture, obviously, which a lot of lush green vegetation, kind of unusual for this time of year for the east side of Texas. We've had some dryness here through central and south central Texas. The panhandle, especially the western panhandle, has been in excellent shape. A little bit sparse rainfall up here over the eastern panhandle, but as a whole, for this time of year, coming out of July and going into August, the state of Texas is actually in pretty good shape in terms of moisture. If we look at the drought monitor, it'll show you where these dry areas are. So if we go to the next slide, we can see what that looks like, and you can see where there actually a little bit of dryness down here again, central and south central Texas, the eastern panhandle, but there really isn't anything widespread or significant occurring in terms of large-scale regional drought. And again, coming out of the summer, when the storm track goes to the north, the heat and the dryness usually sets in. It hasn't been the case for the majority of Texas, and even where we've had some little problems with dryness or drought, it's been very flashy in nature, meaning we've had periods of dryness followed up by some weather variability, and that has continued not just for the state of Texas, but really across a large portion of the region, and that has basically kind of kept large-scale regional drought at bay. You know, it comes and then it pushes back a little bit, kind of comes and goes, but nothing that's terribly concerning right now. So this is certainly a good thing. Let's check out what the oceans are doing. If you've seen me speak before, you know I'm all about what the oceans are doing across the entire globe in terms of how that's going to apply to our long-range weather forecast. Two areas that I have bullseyed here, up across the North Pacific and also down here in the ENSO regions. Now, for those of you that don't necessarily know what ENSO means, it just simply means El Nino and the Southern Oscillation. This is the region of the Pacific that we look at to determine if we are going to have an El Nino or a La Nina episode, or simply neither of the two. Okay, so right now, for the most part, we've got a little bit of warming going on in the western ENSO regions, some cooling here in the eastern ENSO regions, but overall, the ENSO state is pretty much neutral. It's not favoring La Nina or El Nino. We're just kind of remaining in the middle and status quo. Something that's happened up there over the north central Pacific is some cooling, which you can see numerically right here as we chart the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Again, this is something that I've charted all the way back to 2005, and I can actually chart it all the way back to 1900 and even beyond if you want to, but I really think that the past 10 to 12 years are really relevant in terms of some of the changes that we've seen take place around here. Negative numbers, the cold phase of the PDO. Positive numbers are the warm phase of the PDO, and you can see where Texas was really having problems with drought right here, late 10, 11, 12, 13, and then we finally started to see the PDO flip right here. Notice the positive numbers starting to show up in early 14 that have really persisted since early 2014. And you might be scratching your head thinking, wow, you know, since that's happened, we haven't had a problem with major drought here in Texas for the majority of the south central high plains. That is usually the case. Cold PDO usually means drought is going to be a problem for Texas. Warm PDO reverses that trend, and you can see that here on the next graphic that I'm going to show you. The PDO and its different phases. This right here is the positive phase. This red is the warm water that extends from the Gulf of Alaska down the west coast of the U.S. and out here near Hawaii. There's a cold pool out here. This is the positive phase, or the warm phase of the PDO, where we usually don't have to worry about drought too much in places like Texas, the western and the southern high plains. This is the pattern that gets us into trouble. It's the exact opposite. This is when the PDO flips negative. The warm water that was here in the positive phase basically gets replaced with cold water here. This is the phase that we usually have to worry about more La Nina type episodes where drought can get a foothold and really expand in nature. We do not have to worry about that right now. We've been very fortunate with this phase over the past couple of years or so, and a lot of us have reaped the benefits of that with some very good looking moisture. Let's go to the next slide and show you that the Atlantic has a very similar type phase that has really been positive since about 1995. And here recently, you can see some of the numbers down here, especially since late 14 through 15, 16, have been favoring a more negative type phase. Not strongly negative, but somewhat negative. And it's when you have that positive PDO and that negative AMO that usually tends to keep drought at bay for not only Texas, but a large portion of the plain states. So if we go to the next slide here and show you what's going on, I've shown this to you many times. McCabe put this together back in 2004. It relates drought frequency to what different phases that the oceans are in. And right now, for the most part, we're kind of situated in a little bit of this right here, okay? Where you see the blue, that's where drought frequency is greatly reduced. And I want to couch this by saying that is not a perfect roadmap. Right now we've got portions of South Dakota that are dealing with bad drought. Montana, that's a very good, it's right on the money up there. Northeast Montana is in horrendous shape, as is a large portion of North Dakota. But as you push eastward, Minnesota's doing okay. Wisconsin, parts of northern Illinois, they've been pretty wet here for the past several weeks. Obviously, we're not having anything to worry about in Colorado, New Mexico, most of Texas right here. So while it isn't a perfect roadmap, it's a good starting point for what that particular phase of the oceans usually means for us. You look at these additional phases right here. This is the phase that got us in trouble back in late 10. And especially into 2011 where the Pacific was cold and the Atlantic was warm. All of that red simply means enhanced drought frequency. So right now we're still reaping the benefits from a weak phase like this. I think eventually we're going to see a little bit of a change here, but we're really kind of unsure how the Pacific is going to respond when it changes. Do we flip the script and go back to the cold phase, or do we kind of stay neutral or weakly warm? That's something that we're going to continue to find out, but it's something that I'm always watching, and when I do see that Pacific start to get colder, that's when I'm going to start to sound the alarms in terms of drought potential, and I do not see that happening just yet, but it's still something I'm watching very closely. Let's look at the ENSO forecast update and see what that's going to look like over the next several months. So starting down there, April, May, June 2017, this takes you all the way through March, April, May of 2018. And what you need to know about this graph is that all of these models over here are looking at the same thing. They're trying to forecast on whether or not we're going to have an El Nino or La Nina, or if things are going to stay kind of neutral. And the yellow line that you see right here is the mean of all of these different models and their forecasts. So the yellow line pretty much keeps us right above the zero line right there, or basically in the neutral phase or weakly warm, but is not forecasting an El Nino episode at this particular time. It doesn't necessarily mean the Pacific is going to go full-on cold again. In fact, it's not. The way these models see it, it'll stay weakly warm, which can in turn benefit us in terms of moisture here in the southern plains, or really across the majority of the plain states. So, and these are the different types of El Ninos. I just wanted to show this to you because if we were to have an El Nino episode that gets going here in the late summer or into the fall, it's likely going to be kind of a hybrid or Modoki El Nino. And what that simply means is that the warmest water favors the western of those ENSO regions right here versus the eastern Pacific is a little bit on the cool side. So again, you've got warm pockets of water here and there, but the warmest of that water that's in the ENSO regions favors the western reaches of those ENSO regions, with the cooler stuff a little bit farther east. What does that mean in terms of the opposite or a different type of El Nino? Well, this is more of a traditional El Nino. This is the one that we just came out of about a year or so ago, where you have that warm water that's really emanating off the west coast of South America. This is where the warmest water is located. So it's a little bit different. You shift these warm pools around in those ENSO regions, and it has huge ramifications for what we see in terms of our long-range weather forecast. So certainly doesn't look like we would have any type of this. If we have an El Nino, which doesn't look like all that likely right now, it would be that Modoki phase, or kind of a hybrid thing, which I'll talk more about here with the different maps that I'm going to show you. So different El Nino types greatly influence those precipitation patterns. This is a Modoki phase right here where you're seeing the brown. that's where it would be excessively dry during that phase where you're seeing the greens. That's where it would be wet. Over here we've got the traditional El Nino phase, and you can see a lot more green on here. Some dry areas here and there, but by and large, certainly some wetness across the western United States, parts of the plains and the southern plains. But if we were to have that weak Modoki episode, you could see that it still benefits a large portion of Texas. No excessive dryness really anywhere with that particular setup. The dry bullseye would likely end up a little bit farther west. And again, if we were to go to that phase. Right now, it doesn't look all that likely, but I just wanted to show you the differences here because I think it's exceptionally important, especially in long-range forecasting. Let's take you through the next, say, 45 days or so here with the Euro computer model. This is actually the 46-day precipitation forecast. Grabbed it last week. The latest update comes out later this evening, but I wanted to show you kind of something that this model has been keen on over the past couple of weeks or so. Wherever you're seeing the greens and the blues, that's where the model is indicating the likelihood of wetter than average conditions. Where you're seeing brown, that's the exact opposite, drier than average conditions. And right now, this model is really bullseyeing here, southeast Kansas, Oklahoma, North Texas, really a large portion of Texas to stay fairly wet over the next month and a half or so. And we're getting ready to gear up for the tropical season as well. That may come into play here as what it's looking at as far as maybe a couple of tropical storms, maybe a hurricane or two sneaking into the Gulf. Either way, whether it comes from a tropical entity or just simply from good chances of showers and thunderstorms, it is not forecasting any dryness in this region, and that helps a great deal. Not only do we get through July in pretty good shape, if we can get through the rest of August and early September in good shape, that really helps to set us up nicely in terms of subsoil moisture, keeping everything lush and growing and doing some really good things. Even up here in my backyard where we've been very wet off and on through the month of July and into early August, it's keeping that train going for us, and most of the plains looking in pretty good shape. So I'm pretty encouraged by something like this. Let's look at some additional computer models. This one that's going to be forecasting is the North American Multi-Model Ensemble. It's a conglomeration of different models putting together a similar forecast, and then it spits out a mean forecast, which is what you're looking at right here. And this is actually its precipitation forecast for the month of September, where you're seeing brown, that's where it's indicating the chances for maybe some drier than average conditions. Green, the exact opposite, and you see the green shading right here across central and east central Texas, down along the Gulf Coast, with no brown showing up really anywhere across Texas. So again, the model is kind of keen on the same thing that the Euro model was, and not having a real big problem with any moisture across the state of Texas, at least in the near future. If we go to the next month here, we'll look at the month of October, and you can see still some wetness showing up here across southern Nebraska, Kansas, the Texas Panhandle. A bunch of white here across Texas, simply meaning that the model is suggesting at least average moisture, nothing that would indicate the exact opposite going down into the drier than average conditions. So that's some good news. The month of November, a little dry patch right here, possibly slight dryness down along the Rio Grande, south central portions of Texas. Some decent moisture still falling across parts of the western high plains, but no excessive dry signal here across Texas or really anywhere across the Gulf Coast. So that's good news. The month of December shows up wet at this time, and I know you might be saying, well, we're going out months in advance. What's the accuracy of something like this? It's really pretty simple. The farther you go out in time, folks, the less accurate the forecast is going to be. That's just simple statistics and model statistics, and that's especially true here with computer model information. But I'm not necessarily focused on where the green is. I'm focused on where the brown isn't. If there was going to be a really strong dry signal setting up shop here, we'd at least see a little hint of that, and at this time it's the exact opposite. So even if this doesn't happen and we're just getting average moisture, hey, that's still a pretty significant win. If we look into January, again, no brown across Texas, a little bit of green right here across the southern Panhandle, the Red River Valley, but again, no real big dry signal anywhere across Texas or the Gulf Coast, and that's some good news, again, right there into January. February, little dry signal here southeast Texas, but again, nothing excessive. Most of the state, in fact, the majority of the state is completely white here, indicating at least average moisture. The wet areas up here across the northern plains, but no problems, at least as this model sees it right now, as far as dryness is concerned. I want to talk a little more about that with the next model that we're going to look at right now. So let's go to the Jamstec computer model. This model is out of Japan. I show this to you every year that I'm down here. I also put it from time to time in the WeatherWise article in the Southern Livestock Standard, so I urge you to check that out. But this is a global plot right here, and Texas right there, and this is for September, October, November, and it's got some green right here across the most of West Texas, a little bit of dryness, Red River Valley, most of East Texas kind of in the white. So again, no excessive drought signal showing up right there, and a lot of green. You see the green here across Mexico and New Mexico. That's likely still in association with some of the monsoon, the later monsoon season, and also maybe a hurricane or two that sneaks up the Mexican coast that could also give a large portion of Texas some moisture. So still no problems the way even this model sees it, September, October, November. For December, January, and February, this is a little bit more concerning, and I am not at all ready to sign off on this just because it would be a huge pattern change, but at the same time, I can't discount it. It is showing a lot of dryness here across Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, right up into the Tennessee and the Mississippi River valleys right there that would produce a good deal of dryness. That is a very stout dry signal for right now. It is one of the first times that this model has shown that in recent model runs, so that's one of the reasons why I'm not ready to sign off on it just yet. I want to see what happens the next month to see if that signal is still there. I'm guessing it's probably going to be weaker than what this signal is, but it's still something that I'm watching. If we look at the March, April, May, which is obviously very important time across all of the plains, it's got some dryness here from Iowa, Kansas, down into the western portion of Texas and Oklahoma. Again, it's a long ways out there. This is the first time that this model has shown this, so I want to get a couple of additional runs under my belt before I sign off on that, but it shows East Texas being in pretty good shape, and the same area that was so dry the previous months actually being the exact opposite here. Wet weather for Arkansas, Tennessee, down here along the Gulf Coast. So the model kind of jumpy in that regard, and in this particular pattern that we're in and we have been in, it really isn't the large-scale, regional, long-lasting droughts that have been a problem. It's been the flashy stuff, the stuff that really comes on like gangbusters and lasts a couple of months and then goes completely away when we get a bunch of moisture thereafter. That might be what the model is hinting at, but like I said, I'm going to work on that over the next couple of months, and hopefully the model will kind of settle itself down and we can get a better idea for what's going to happen. So my thoughts overall is that any El Nino episode would be weak and certainly not traditional. It would be that Modoki phase, that hybrid phase, and really, I think it's most likely going to stay neutral, just kind of where we've been over the past several months. So not really favoring an El Nino or a La Nina episode. The analog years, I haven't touched a whole lot on that, folks, and for those of you that don't know what an analog year is, it's when you take the current oceanic setup across the globe and you look at that pattern and you look back into history and cherry pick years that had the similar type setup, and usually it's a pretty good forecasting tool to project what the upcoming year is going to be. The analogs are an absolute disaster because you really don't have a good idea of a good fit for this year, at least as of yet. So what I'd like to do is just simply say, hey, let's let the pattern show itself just a little bit more and see what changes take place here as we wrap up summer and head into fall, and that'll give us a better idea and maybe a little bit better idea of some of the analogs that may show themselves by late fall and into the winter. PDO is likely going to stay positive. Mainly neutral AMO continues. So again, that isn't going to light us up with a stout drought signal or a dry signal for the southern plains or the western plains. So I think that's at least a good news. Short-term flashy drought is still the biggest potential problem. Just like the Jamstec model was potentially showing December, January, February, it'd be very flashy and then it would be replaced by moisture thereafter. And the fact of the matter is, if we have a wet fall coming into Texas and a large part of the southern plains of the Gulf Coast, we would be able to weather a flashy drought because of that decent subsoil moisture that we have a whole lot better than if we just simply had average moisture. So with the way the pattern is set up, we might be able to weather a flashy drought if it were indeed to occur, depending on exactly where it did occur. So that's one of the things that I'm just kind of most focused on right now. And again, real key here is no immediate threat of a La Nina episode. The longer we can keep that business away, the better odds that we have of at least getting average moisture, and in some cases with the current setup, above average moisture. The last thing I want to leave you with right here, folks, is my contact information. Again, I've been down here for the past several years. I've talked a lot with you folks. You've contacted me. We've had a really good relationship, not only with you fine folks that have attended this presentation, but also with the folks that I work with at Texas A&M from time to time. It's been a great partnership, and I love getting down here to see you guys. But if you have any questions at all about what I've talked about, please send me an email. Email me at any time. You can look me up on Twitter right there. If you need weather for your business, please just ask for a quote. Because that's what this is all about. We're working to try to make the weather work for you, especially in a long-range forecast capacity. And as I mentioned, please check out weather5280.com. That's the business that we're really trying to get off the ground and make weather matter to you, especially in the long-range capacity. So again, thank you folks for attending my presentation. Thank you to Texas A&M for having me down here, even if a video capacity, hooking up with Dr. Jason Clear. It's always a pleasure, folks, and I hope to see you in person next year.